Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Jeff Stetz. I'm the Director of Science for the Center for Wildlife Studies and an assistant professor. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm coming to you from a very, very snowy Palmer, Alaska. It's, record snows after record winds after record cold. Hopefully other folks are having a bit calmer of a winter. One of the pleasures of my job is to help coordinate this series where we have a chance to bring out our educators and collaborators to discuss the amazing work that they're part of. It's always a highlight of my month, I can honestly say, to get to work with folks like our presenters today. I always learn a ton. There will be a chance for questions following the presentation today. If you want, you can add them to the chat box or wait till the presentation's over and either add them then or turn on your camera and ask directly. We ask everyone to keep their microphones muted, which is the default for entering the talk, just to reduce the amount of distractions during the presentation. With that, excuse me, today it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Jimenez. Laura is a quantitative biologist whose research explores how organisms' responses to environmental gradients shape global biodiversity patterns and species geographic distributions. She develops advanced statistical and inferential methods to characterize species climatic niches and to predict how climate change may alter where species can live or how invasive species spread. Her work also compares statistical approaches for estimating species richness and population density to improve future biodiversity surveys. In addition to being an instructor with CWS, Dr. Jimenez is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Mathematical Modeling at the University of Chile, where she works on quantitative ecology at the intersection of climate, biodiversity, and mathematical modeling. Previously, she held a postdoctoral position in the Department of Biology at the University of Hawaii, contributing to research in statistical ecology. Her current research integrates novel data sources such as remote sensing and genomic data with machine learning to study the distribution and community composition of organisms like marine plankton, aiming to better understand ecological responses to environmental change and inform conservation strategies. I know I'm thrilled to welcome her today to give her talk entitled Modeling and Mapping Species Distributions, an Overview of Applications. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Laura. Whose camera may be frozen at the moment. It looks like we're starting the year with a technical glitch, but hopefully folks will hang on for a minute and see if this refreshes. I'll go ahead and make a note about this, that even if things don't go well today with the technology, we will be posting the presentation to our YouTube playlist. I can provide links for that, and they're available on the CWS page as well. I try and get those posted as quickly as I can, usually within a few days or so. So feel free to share those with your colleagues, racking up a pretty good selection of presentations now.
Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. I'm very happy to share some of my research with you all and also to do some advertisement on the species distribution modeling course that we have. I'm preparing for the Center for Wildlife Studies. Thank you for the introduction. Just I'm going to give a small update about the details that Jeff gave. I just started a position at a Center for Research and Innovation on Climate Change. So now you see my affiliation changed a little bit of what Jeff said. Okay, so let's start. Let me put my presentation on full screen. And okay. So, in general, organisms experience an array of factors in shaping their geographic distributions. And these factors are studied in a field that is coming to be called distributional ecology or ecological biogeography. This field centers around the question of why populations of a species are where they are and why they are not where they are not. And as I will discuss in this talk, this is an old and new at the same time field that has seen intensive research attention from across the fields of ecology, biogeography, systematics, and even fields as far as public health, invasion biology, and agricultural planning. Since this talk is focused on species distributions, first I want to give some motivation on why we are interested in modeling a species distribution. Well, I took this table from a book by Kevin Gaston, where he explains that here are four broad questions in ecology that we want to understand, where we want to understand different aspects of a species. And so, for example, if we want to understand how a species is likely to respond to global environmental change, what he argues is that we need to understand first what determines the limits of the geographic range of the species. If our question is how to identify the best course for maintaining biodiversity, then we need to understand how widely species are distributed and what influences this extent of the range. If we want to study diseases, it can be of humans, livestock, or crops, then this begs an understanding of why species are more abundant in some places than they are in others. And finally, if we want to answer questions related to how to stop the spread of an invasive species, then we want to understand how we can predict the patterns or rates of expansion of the geographic range of that species. And so in all this, in the second column, what you can see in common is that we need to understand different aspects of the distribution of the species. It can be the limits, the patterns within the distribution, how abundant the species is within that range, and so on. So with that in mind, well, generally speaking, species distribution models are numerical tools that combine observations of species occurrence, or we can use even abundance, with environmental estimates. And we call them, for an abbreviation, SDMs. So an SDM can be defined as a model that relates species distribution data with information on the environmental and spatial characteristics of those locations. The resulting model, we use different algorithms to represent that relationship between species occurrences and the environment. But the resulting model can be used to provide an understanding of the species distribution and also to predict how that distribution looks like in a landscape and how it may look like in the future or how it looked in the past. And nowadays, well, SDMs are widely used across terrestrial, freshwater, and even marine species. I'm not going to focus on all the variety of different models that are used to fit these relationships. I'm going to show you some examples of the applications of SDMs. In the literature, this is important to mention, you can also find SDMs as bioclimatic models. Climate envelopes are one example of the models used to represent this relationship, and also ecological niche models. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that's one of the main focus of my research. All right, so, oh, sorry. So before I show you the examples, I just want to give you some context about the beginnings or the roots of species distribution models. Now, the ecological roots of SDMs belong to in those early studies that describe biological patterns in terms of the relationships with geographical and environmental gradients. And Here I gave you two examples of Joseph Grinnell, where he studied that type of environmental gradients. And later, research that highlighted the individualistic responses of species to their environment. This also provided the conceptual argument for modeling individual species rather than whole communities. And we have two examples, one for vegetation by Robert Whittaker in the 1950s, and another one for birds by Robert MacArthur, also in the 1950s. On the other hand, the modern quantitative modeling and mapping of species distributions emerged when two parallel streams of research converged. On one hand, field-based ecological studies of species habitat associations benefited from new regression models that provided coherent treatments for error distributions of presence-absence data or even count data. For example, generalized linear models enabled regression-based SDMs in the 1970s and the 1980s. And well, the key structural features of generalized linear models continue to be useful and are part of many current methods, including those called resource selection functions and even the maximum entropy models. At the same time, rapid methodological advances in physical geography provided new data and information systems that were helpful to develop this field. New methods allow robust and detailed preparation of digital models of the Earth's surface elevation, interpolation of different climate parameters, and even remote sensing of surface conditions. This, of course, enhanced the species distribution modeling capabilities by providing estimates of environmental conditions across entire landscapes. Beside these advances, we also had the development of geographic information systems, which are very important tools for storing and manipulating both species records and environmental data. And well, then early approaches to species distribution models are a combination of GIS tools and some regression models. At the beginning, the models were very simple. For example, people was using simple geographic envelopes, convex hulls, and some other algorithms based on environmental matching. I wanted to mention this because all these gains are easily taken for granted nowadays, but stand in contrast of the resources available to early ecologists who usually only had simple measurements of location and sometimes of local site conditions. So in summary, species distribution models, as we think them today, emerged when new statistical methods from field-based habitat studies were linked to GIS-based environmental layers. And thanks to the different platforms that we have available today, where we have lots of primary biodiversity data. This is records that document the occurrence of an organism in a specific time and place. And also, this may include other metadata such that who collected the data, some climatic conditions of the site, and so on. And here are some of the main platforms that we use in species distribution model to gather the different types of data. GVIP is one of the main sources, but we have others such as iNaturalist, eBird, and so on. And well, we can, given the longitude and latitude coordinates of each of the occurrence points for the species of interest, we can extract the different climatic conditions that are of interest for the species using other platforms such as WorkLean, Chelsea, or if you are working with marine species, BioOracle is one of the main sources of information. So as you can see, we start with points in geography, represented by the longitude and latitude values of those records. And then by extracting the different environmental conditions that are typical of those sites, we can relate those observations to the requirements of the species and try to estimate the species distribution. So there is an important concept that is central to SDMs, and this is the distinction between geographic and environmental space. In geographic space, typically we have only two coordinates, right? Longitude and latitude. Sometimes we have three if you take into account elevation, or if you are working with marine species, then you have depth. And in this space, we typically work with gridded or discrete representations of geography, so for each point in that grid, we can have a corresponding point on the other space that is called environmental space, which is defined by the different environmental factors that affect the presence of the species. And we can have 2, 3, or more. And so for each point in geography, by extracting those environmental conditions at that location, we can represent that occurrence point in environmental space. And we have this relationship that allows us to come and go from one space to another. So if we select a subset of environmental conditions in environmental space, we can bring it back to geography by using the geographic coordinates and highlight the corresponding areas of those environmental conditions. So if we characterize a region in environmental space, it is possible to map it into geographic space and vice versa. And this is a concept called Hutchinson's duality. Especially in early stages of species distribution modeling research, the models used were purely geographic. For example, the range maps, kernel density estimates, and convex hoods were applied directly to the observations in geographic space, and they were used to delimit the species distribution. But in environmental space, we can, the position of a population in environmental space affects its fitness. Therefore, one can define regions with positive fitness, for example, the conditions inside this yellow rectangle, and conditions with non-positive fitness based, and we can estimate the limits of that rectangle using the presence points. We can model, this is called the ecological niche of the species. When we try to model those presence points in environmental space, then we are describing some features of the ecological niche of the species. And so these relationships allow us to make this relation between ecological niches. If we learn something about the ecological niche, then we can translate that knowledge into geographic space and say something about the species distribution, and it works the other way around. If we learn something about the species distribution, then in environmental space, we can say something about the species niche. So in the course, I'm going to focus on the different aspects that come with this species distribution modeling process, because There are different stages that need to be done in order to do the full modeling exercise. But the key steps in the modeling process are the following. We start by gathering data, relevant data for the species of interest, starting with occurrence data, but also environmental factors that we believe are relevant to limit the species distribution. And once we gather that data, we need to also assess the accuracy and the comprehensiveness of this set of data. We also need to assess the relevance and the completeness of the predictors that we want to use for the model. And well, there's another set of tools to help us decide how to deal with correlated predictors in case we have them. If we have too many candidates as environmental predictors, we have methods to select the most relevant. And after that, another important step is to select the appropriate modeling approach. Here I'm showing you one that is based on making some assumptions about the shape of the ecological niche of the species. In the literature, you can find these models as ellipse models or Mahalanobis models, because they assume that the ecological niche can be modeled as these ellipses if you are in two-dimensional space, in environmental space, or ellipsoids if you have more than two environmental factors. Typically, we also divide the whole set of data into a training and a testing set. So after you feed your models, your species distribution model in environmental space, you go back to geography to make a map of predictions on the potential, what we call the potential distribution of the species. And another very important step of this whole process is to evaluate the model. And this includes to evaluate how realistic are the response curves that we are fitting in this step of the process, how good the model fits the data that we have. If we are using, for example, generalized linear models or other type of regression, we need to evaluate the residuals, and we have to evaluate the predicted performance of using the test data. So typically that is done using ROC curves. And of course, we need to remind that this process don't end after you evaluate your model. If you have new data available, you can iterate this process as many times as you want. And of course, the idea is that this will improve the results of our model. All right, so in the course, I'm going to show with a lot of detail how we work in the different stages of the modeling process. And since this is where there is new research almost every day on this field, well, I'm going to show some new developments that focusing on improving each of these steps along the process. Okay. So other important concepts that help us link species distributions and ecological niches are the following. We have this framework called the BAM diagram that help us understand what are the main factors that affect the species distribution. And it says that we can separate those factors into three main sets. We have, well, a site in geography is part of the species distribution. It has, on one hand, the right biotic factors, which are the interacting species that the focal species needs to survive. We also need favorable climatic conditions at those sites. And the third element, the individuals of the species need to be able to reach those sites. And so if we are using presence data, the idea here is that they are coming most of the time from the intersection of these three sets, where we have the favorable climatic conditions, the right combination of biotic factors, and the species was able to move there. However, if we want to make predictions, especially about how the species distribution may change given future climatic conditions, we may be more interested in modeling the whole set of abiotic factors, because that is the one that corresponds to what we call the fundamental niche of a species. This is the full set of climatic conditions that allow the species persistence through time. And therefore, if we model that set, we're going to have a better result in those predictions. So for example, if we represent that fundamental niche as an ellipse in this environmental space, as you can see, I highlighted in purple and green all the sites that are inside this niche. And when you see them highlighted in the map, you see that they are in very different locations, one set in North America and one set in South America. If the species is native from North America and it can only move to the sites that are highlighted in purple and orange, then the species accessible sites are here highlighted also in orange. Those are the ones that belong to the blue set, right? Both the purple and the green points in this case are part of the green set, the favorable climatic conditions for the species. And well, typically for the biotic factors, that is something that is more difficult to include in the modeling. However, if these are available for the species of interest, there are some methodologies that help us integrate them into the modeling process. I already mentioned the definition of the fundamental niche, so it is important to say that that sample of presence points that you're going to use to fit your models then are typically representing just a subset of the fundamental niche, which is the object that ideally you want to approach when you fit your model. All right. So what assumptions can we make to model the fundamental niche using those presence points? And after that, we can go back to the predictions of the potential distribution of the species. Well, based on some physiological experiments in which they bring individuals into the lab and they put them under different climatic conditions, and you register when they survive and when they don't survive. We know that a typical response curve to an environmental gradient are like this, a bell-shaped curve. Or at the most, well, sometimes they can be a little bit asymmetrical, but this is a good model to represent how that curve typically behaves. So for different species, what we expect is that there is an optimum value of that gradient where the species is going to be more commonly found. And when you go either below that value or very far from that value on the right, then there is a point in which the species is no longer able to survive. And well, sometimes we are so interested in seeing how those curves intersect when we compare for different species. Following this idea, this is here we are using only one environmental factor. But if we consider more than one environmental factor, then we can translate this idea into more dimensions. And a typical response curve then in a two-dimensional space is going to look like these ellipsoids that we have here. If we have three environmental factors, then we have ellipsoids, and this idea can be generalized into more dimensions, and of course, it's going to be more difficult to do visualization of those models. But then this is the main idea that I took into consideration for a couple of models that I'm going to show you that I proposed during my PhD research. And the first model that I'm going to show you is going to be based on using a set of presence data as a typical species distribution model does. But also, there are some cases for which these experiments have been done. And typically, what we know from those experiments is that there is a minimum and a maximum value of the different environmental factors in which the individuals of the species were able to survive. And then we want to combine the information of the presence points that here are highlighted in different colors for different virtual species, together with those tolerance ranges that come from physiological experiments. And the idea is then that since we are not only supplying a subset of the abiotic factors that are favorable for the species, we're complementing that information with those physiological regions that come from the experiments. So here's the first application that I wanted to show you, these species distribution models, in which we apply this model that combines the information of presence points together with results from physiological experiments. These are models for different stages in the life cycle of a tick, Rhiphicephalus microplus. So the black box that you see in these diagrams, these figures, represent the minimum and maximum temperature where the individuals of the species survive during the different experiments. And in the y-axis, we have mean relative humidity. So we also have a minimum and maximum value that we know the species survived. And there are some color points that represent the presences. You can see different ellipsoids here. There are the resulting models that we fitted for the fundamental niche of the species. And we are testing those models. Here, this model we only use presences of individuals that were in life stages earlier than adulthood. These are just adults, and this is a combination of all those. And here you see the purple points are some occurrence points that we use to test our model. And in general, you can see that most of those points are inside the different models for the fundamental niche. However, there are a few that fall outside of that, those ranges that are defined by the ellipses. Well, when you plot the result of this niche model from environmental space, we go back to geographic space. The blue areas highlighted here represent the climatically suitable sites for this species, and the gray areas are the unsuitable regions for the species. And again, here you can see the test points in purple. So especially this one is very clear that is not included as part of the prediction of our model. So one thing that we did is to integrate the information about some of the biotic factors relevant for this species, since we are talking about a tick that depends on having hosts to feed, especially as adults. Then we gather data about the different wild hosts that were reported in the literature for this species. And what you can see here in this map, these regions represent sites where there is medium to high density of the different wild host species that were reported for this species. So with this, we wanted to complement the predictions of our niche model and try to see if this recovers the whole shape of the set of presence points that resemble better what we call the realized niche. And you can see that, yeah, in blue and green, we have the predictions of our model that capture most of the variation that is contained in the data. And when we incorporate those other biotic factors to the shape in these clouds of points, and then we capture those other observations. That we believe that most of them must be adults that are reaching other places outside of probably of the niche, and just because the host helped them to move to very far places. Following a similar idea in which we first modeled the ecological niche, the fundamental niche of the species, assuming that these ellipsoids are a good representation of the niche. Another thing that I wanted to incorporate is the limitations, the dispersal limitations of the species. So again, we know that the set of presence points that we can use to estimate the species distribution might not represent the full size of the climatic niche, the abiotic factors. So in this second type of model, what we have is a restriction of where the species is able to move. So in environmental space, if this is the ecological niche of the species, this model says that ideally we should be able to observe the species in any environmental combination in this space, but frequently we are going to observe it around the center of the niche. And as we go far from that point, it's going to be less likely to find a presence of the species. However, if the species is not able to move and reach those conditions that are inside the fundamental niche, for example, here is a species that has more access to this region of environmental space. And just because of that, we sometimes are going to find it even outside the fundamental niche. So we wanted to combine this information that comes from the presence points together with a hypothesis of where the species is able to move, because that tells us where is more likely to observe the species or where is less likely to observe the species. And with that information, we try to recover the full fundamental niche. If we don't use here, what I'm showing is that if we don't use that information and estimate the fundamental niche using only presence points, well, it can be the case that those presence points give us a wrong representation of the niche of the species. And to show an application of this type of model, I'm going to use this example of the Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinea. So here are the presence points that we use for the species. Here's the polygon that we build using different assumptions about where the species is able to move, whether it can be in very in sites with a lot of elevation or not. And after applying the model, are the resulting ellipses that represent the fundamental niche of the species. They capture most of the presence points that we have. And here, these blue points are, they come from, two come from North America, one from Europe, because somehow this species was able to reach those places. And so it can be a problem. So we can see here those points in geographic space together with the prediction of the potential species distribution of the species. Oh, sorry, species distribution of this hornet. And another exercise that we made in another paper was to use this type of species distribution model together with an algorithm that we designed to simulate how the species could spread um, and try to see what would be the possible spread routes that the species can follow. Here is another example. Here we were focused on studying the species distribution of some native ferns from the dryland ecosystems in the Hawaiian archipelago. We know that there are some non-native species already present in these ecosystems that may be competing for suitable habitat with these native species. So again, we estimated first the fundamental niche of the species, and then we translated those results of the model into a map of the potential species distribution of the different native species. In yellow, you can see the points, that those points corresponds to the non-native species. So here is a clear example where you can see a lot of those points inside the ranges of the native species. So that is a concern for the natives, the native species. And well, after delimiting the potential species distribution, we wanted to know if these areas are really available for the species, because we know that historically the Hawaiian Islands have gone through a lot of land use changes. So areas that still hold the environmental conditions that are favorable for these native species may no longer be available. So we combined the results of the model with different maps of land use change, and we quantified what are the real percentages of those potential distributions that are available for the species. So for example, here, using classification of the land use between these four categories that represent, that are the regions are covered by fully native species, a mix between native and introduced species. Developed means that there is a city or other type of construction, and where they are completely covered by alien species. So from the whole potential distribution of these four native species, what you can see is that in worst case scenario, there is only less than 10% of that potential distribution available for the species that is covered by native species. Another application that I wanted to show you is, well, these authors use another approach. They are no longer using ellipsoids to model the fundamental niche and then translating those results into a geographic map. They are using a maximum entropy approach to do the calibration of the models. And here what I'm showing you is the result of the potential distribution of lots for producing avocado. Instead of occurrence points, they use those locations of lots that are known to be growing the avocados. And what is very interesting for this work is that they also make this analysis. They studied the relationship between the output of the model and the productivity of those lots. And they actually found a significant, statistically significant relationship. That means that the results of these models can be used to predict the productivity. This is where we have very favorable conditions according to the species distribution model. Maybe we can find very good places to start new production lots of avocado, and we can in that way ensure that they are going to have a good productivity. Well, the different panels here, they fitted different models. These two were the best that they fitted, and the different panels in the rows mean that They classified the different lots between low, medium, and high. That means how many technology they use to grow the avocados. But regardless of the type of model or the type of technology that they use, these relationships are good. And then what they propose is that we can use these species distribution models to guide or find places where we can start these avocado production lots. And finally, another application that I wanted to show you is more related to vector-borne diseases and how the spread of different diseases may be affected by climate change. So here I have another study in which they collected data for a mosquito in the genus Culex. They used this presence data to feed a species distribution model. And since they are interested in understanding the effects of the climate change on the spatial distribution of the species, well, they not only use the current climatic conditions observed at these occurrence points, they also use different climate change scenarios that are available in the open access platforms. So basically, what they want to understand is if there are some places here inside the green polygon that are suitable, that have favorable climatic conditions for the species now, and they will have suitable conditions in the future as well. But there might be some sites where are suitable now, but in the future won't be favorable anymore. And we also have the other case where right now they are not suitable, but in the future they will be. So by studying these changes, we can understand whether the species might be able to spread or if the species distribution is going to contract. And it is interesting to study those changes there. So here are the maps that these authors presented. This is the potential species distribution of the mosquito. This is the prediction under one of the climate change scenarios that they explored. They explored different scenarios, but this is one of them. And then it is interesting to intersect these maps and analyze the differences to see what areas may be of concern in the future. So here in blue, all the areas in blue are the ones that are going to be favorable. They hold favorable climatic conditions now and in the future, but in red, the dark red means that all of the models that they run agree that those places are going to hold favorable conditions in the future, and the light red areas mean that only a small percentage of the models predicted those places as part of the future distribution of the species. So yeah, with this map, with this type of map, we can try to make some recommendations to policymakers or to plan some interventions in the population to try to stop the spread of the species. And well, that was my last example of applications of species distribution models. So with that, thank you for being today in the talk, and I'll be happy to answer any question.
Thanks, Laura. That was outstanding. I've got a question of my own, but I'll defer to the audience, seeing a lot of positive response. Do we have any questions for Laura? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat box. There we go. Can you see the chat, Laura?
Yes, I'm opening it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have one from Scott. from your experience, knowledge, is it possible to model distributions for rare, unstudied organisms with few observations? Is there anything that can be done to adjust for low sample size, or does modeling simply become less practical? I'm going to use this figure here. I think you can do an initial exercise where you feed a species distribution model, even with a few observations, of course, being careful about the conclusions that you're going to have from that exercise. But there are some studies where they use that initial species distribution model to try to guide the new fieldwork and to prioritize areas where they can go and try to collect more data about the species. So that's one possible application. I don't think there is any particular type of model that is more suited to work with a small data set, but you can give it a try. I don't know what you mean also by small. Maybe you think that 50 points are too few, but I think with that you can have a very good result still. And also depends a lot on the type of species that you are studying. Maybe if you are working with a species that has a very a small range, it can be easier than working with a species that has a broader range.
I may jump in while we're waiting for the next question. In my realm, I mostly work with market capture modeling. If folks aren't familiar, it's using imperfect detection data to try and, I'll say extrapolate, not the right word, but trying to estimate various demographic parameters like density, abundance, population growth rate, such things. And I've often seen people attempting to use covariates to explain either the detection process or things like trying to explain variation in density that, in my opinion, are not appropriate. Elevation comes to mind because that's really a kind of a surrogate. It's a catch-all. Nothing really cares about elevation. It cares about the things that come along with it, whether it's species, presence, humidities, and so on. Do you have any advice for folks on how, like, best practices for trying to identify appropriate covariates? Even getting into things like spatial resolution is also often a struggle. People tend to use the data that's available and free, which may not always be the most appropriate. Do you have any advice for folks on how to hone in on the most appropriate resolutions and sources of data?
Yes, well, there are different ways to approach that part of how to select the best factors. Ideally, you are an expert of the species that you are trying to model the species, the distribution, and then you can find some literature that supports the argument that those factors are relevant to the limit the distribution. But also it depends on the algorithm that you choose to model that relationship between the occurrence points and the environmental conditions. And some techniques require specifically that the predictors are not correlated. So you have to apply a correlation analysis before putting your predictors into the modeling. What else? But yeah, in general, I like the approach of using start with a few factors and adding more if needed, rather than starting with usually the 19 environmental variables that are available in Worklim. A lot of people does that. And selecting just a few of those. Another popular approach in the literature is to running a principal component analysis and work in that space defined by the first two or three principal components and do your analysis there instead of the original environmental space. So there are different techniques, but yet you have to take into account that it may depend on the type of model that you choose as your uh, modeling technique.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Laura? Of course, she provided her contact information. People are more than welcome to reach out to us anytime with any questions. And while we're waiting for a moment, we're wrapping up here, but here are a couple more links. One to Laura's class, which begins in early March, I believe. And I know I'm looking forward to taking it myself. And then also a link for the Wildlife Wednesday page where we just added another talk for a month from now with Dr. John Martin talking about forestry applications and wildlife conservation and beyond. I see Elizabeth has a question. I'll hand that over to you, Laura.
Yes, I have a question from Lisbeth Bautista. Thank you for your question, Lisbeth. It says, do you think it would be relevant if we correlate the highly illegal traffic species with their distribution and climate change or other environment conditions to know if all that illegally trafficked wildlife are being captured for any environmental condition of one place? Let me see if I understood correctly, but I've seen some attempts in the literature where they try to predict, for example, the coke plants where they are the most suitable places to grow these plants and see whether by looking into those places they can find some illegal lots. That's something that it's been done. But the other thing that you have to take into account when it comes to crops or species that might be aided by humans, and we can easily add more water into the fields and have a better result. So maybe the data that is available, you have to work with it carefully because the environmental conditions usually are altered in those lots. So it is difficult because then how you disentangle whether those climatic conditions are naturally there in those regions and how you distinguish the data that come from those places from the data that comes from lots where they need to put a lot more effort to grow those plants. I don't know if you were, if that answers your question.
I guess so. Well, unless there are other questions, we're a bit over time, just a touch, but wanted to thank everyone for tuning in today and hanging in there with our little internet issue. Oh yeah, we have a follow-up there. Of course, thank you, Laura, so much for taking the time. It was a fantastic talk. Certainly encourage everyone to check out the courses on with CWS, especially Laura's. Again, that's coming up here in a little bit less than 2 months. I'm sure it's gonna be a fantastic class. Hopefully folks again can join us in another month for Dr. Martin's talk as well. And I'd like to say this was by far the best turnout we've had as far as in terms of registration. I just was looking through on the side. We had people from 47 different countries register, everything from Venezuela to Pakistan, India, Fiji. It's just fantastic to see the kind of reach that a talk like this has. It's very exciting for us, of course, and thank everyone for tuning in. Again, if people weren't able to tune in or catch the entire presentation or want to share this with their colleagues, I'll try and have it posted on YouTube within a few days or so. And with that, thank you again, Laura, and we look forward to seeing people at future presentations.